Ain't fighting.
What bait are you using?
Love letter.
How come?
Even fish need love.
Are you nuts?
This better?
Cut it out! His family's got enough issues as it is!
6 guys, all identical with nothing but a designated color and a personality quirk that's over-exaggerated to set them apart from one another. Larger-than-life caricatures of personality types, and plenty of unemployed friend levels of antics. Osomatsu-san had plenty of things going on despite being seemingly about nothing. This show was my Roman Empire back in 2016. It overtook my life, became the main thing that I thought about. Basically, the way I am with Baldur's Gate 3 right now is how I was about Osomatsu-san for a little while in my early 20s. But what is Osomatsu-san? This video is going to be presented in a pretty much spoiler-free way. It is made for people who both have seen the anime and have not seen the anime to be able to watch it and enjoy it, and if you have not seen the anime, hopefully this video convinces you to give it a shot, because it is genuinely one of my favorite animes of all time. We're not gonna deep dive into it in the sense that I'm gonna go through every episode. Instead, we're going to take more of an overall look at the series, its characters, and its fandom and cultural impact. Before Osomatsu-san was a thing, the Osomatsu franchise got its start all the way back in 1962 with Fujio Akatsuka's manga, Osomatsu-kun. It ran weekly in Shonen Sunday magazine until 1969, and followed the boys when they were 10 years old. Just like Osomatsu-san, the series focused mostly on the sextuplets' mischief and the trouble that they would get tangled up in. Halfway through the manga, though, the boys ended up being demoted to supporting characters when Chibita and Iami took the spotlight. They were apparently fan favorites, which is so funny because I have seen a few American fans who are only familiar with the reboot talk about how much they dislike these two and hate the episodes that focus on them. There were 2 early anime adaptations, one running from February of 1966 to March of 1967, and the other running from February of 1988 to December of 1989. These 2 shows followed the boys as kids, like the manga, but the show in the 80s focused more on Chibita and Iami, and I love that for their fans. We love to see well-loved supporting characters get the attention that the people crave. And I do think it's really funny that they went from supporting cast to main cast just because people loved them so much. There were other media adaptations in the past, like a live-action TV special and plenty of video games. Osomatsu was a widely popular series, and Akatsuka even won an award for the series in 1964. One testament to the series' popularity, Iami's iconic bit was referenced by children across Japan, and also referenced in Godzilla. This pose is also referenced a lot in anime just throughout the years, which is really cool. One thing I find particularly interesting about the original and early works is that the sextuplets were treated more as a unit than individual characters. There was no distinctions in their designs, and their personalities only had extremely subtle differences, and they tended to act as one. They were a character as a group. That's basically the origins of Osomatsu. Osomatsu-san started airing in October of 2015 with a wild first episode.
What's happened?
Fun fact, episode 1 of season 1 is essentially lost media. It's only available to watch on pirating websites. It's not even featured on any of the physical releases of the show. And the popular theory here is that it was due to copyright issues, since episode 1 parodies pretty much every popular anime at the time, including animes that were not produced by Studio Parrot, which is the studio that produced Osomatsu-san. It opens with the boys in black and white, the old style of the show, worried about if they have what it takes to make it in the current anime industry. And as they try to find their style and genre, we get a medley of popular tropes, generic anime mess, and parodies of popular titles such as Naruto and Attack on Titan. Such a shame that it's essentially lost media at this point, because it was a wild ride, and for anyone who's an anime fan in 2015, it was such a fun, it was basically like going to an anime convention and being like, oh, I recognize that, or like, oh, this is from that one thing, and it was just a really good time. The rest of the series is a fairly episodic journey of just putting the silly guys in situations, which is fairly typical of a gag series from what I understand. However, there are some genuinely profound character-driven moments scattered throughout the series, more so in the later seasons, but that could just be me being insane about these guys. There's no overarching plot to look at, but even in nonsensical, absurdist comedy bits, there's still a good bit of character. The biggest difference with Osomatsu-san is that the show reworked the sextuplets to make them individual characters, placing more focus on their differences and treating them less like a unit. Sure, they still get into trouble together, but they were individuals in a pack, not just a pack unit. And these guys are all grown up. No longer 10 years old, but 20, or in their early 20s. It's never explicitly stated. All that's important is that they are out of high school and now officially NEETs, which basically just means they are not seeking education, employment, or in any form of training. They're unemployed. And that's all. So that's the overview of Osomatsu-san, but I want to take a look at the characters as well. The eldest and the ringleader, Osomatsu, is kind of the base personality of the group. He's got no individual quirks on the surface, but deep down, it's pretty clear that Osomatsu depends on his brothers following his lead. A lot of his identity is revolved around being the oldest and taking charge and leadership amongst his siblings. And I think that's so interesting because, especially once we get to all the other characters and a lot of the ways that they're kind of larger than life, Osomatsu himself is almost bland in a way. Like, he's a terrible person, but all of the things that you could say about him can also be said about all of the other sextuplets. He is the base unit. He's the first one. He is also the titular character, so I guess it would make sense for him to be the base unit. But one thing that really shines in Osomatsu compared to the others is just how rotten he is, the way that his jealousy kind of keeps him from progressing and has him tearing down those around him, the way that he doesn't want his brothers to succeed because that would mean they basically leave him alone in this trash pit that he has created for them. He's codependent in a way. We can see throughout the series whenever one of them or all of them make steps towards being an adult and becoming independent, Osomatsu does not take that initiative. He sits at home, he lazes around, and he deeply misses his brothers. He wants them back so badly, even if that means effectively ruining their lives. He's incredibly selfish, almost more so than the others. The more I describe them, the more I'm like, why do I love them so much? Osomatsu is deeply insecure. We can see at some points throughout the series when he has his own chances to kind of step up and make progress and, I don't know, date people, something that he's never done before. That man is scared shitless. He's afraid of growing up. He's afraid of living life, pretty much. He's afraid of leaving his comfort zone, more so than the average person. Osomatsu is a character that, behind all of the gags, is just a deeply unhappy, selfish, and kind of lonely individual. Have you ever met a guy who loves himself more than Karamatsu loves himself? This guy is obnoxious and cringe, but he is free and I love him. His main quirk is that he's obsessed with being the cool guy, but he's really bad at it. He will randomly speak English because he thinks it sounds cool, or he'll try his best to be mysterious and suave, but it just comes off as being creepy and pathetic. Karamatsu is incredibly pathetic, but it's fun. He's very self-absorbed and definitely almost you could make the argument that a lot of his self-absorption and his self-love is a crutch for how incredibly insecure he is. It's a crutch for how little he actually thinks of himself. And honestly, one thing about Karamatsu is he seems to be the least favorite brother amongst the group. He's definitely a fan favorite, but in the context of the actual series, he is the one that gets bullied the most by his brothers. He's the one that seems to get left behind and not really cared about all that much. And when you really get in your feelings about it, it's incredibly sad, but it just goes to show how shitty these guys are to each other and to everyone around them. But it's also funny because Karamatsu is no better. He would do the same thing to his brothers, and that's just how they are. That's how the Matsuno family unit works, apparently. One thing about Karamatsu is that he's also very theatrical. He's very into music, or at least pretending that he's good at performing music because it fits with that cool guy persona that he so badly wants to be. He's very performance driven, whether that's performing a mask of being a cool guy in public or just putting on a show for his brothers or the audience. He's basically your average cringe theater guy who thinks a lot highly of himself, or at least tries to come off that way. But it is very, very endearing when it's in this little Muppet cartoon format. Choromatsu is the uptight one. He's the straight man of the group. He's the one who thinks that he's the most likely to make it in the real world and the most prepared for being an adult. However, that is all talk. He is just a hypocrite who is as bad as the rest of them. Choromatsu is a bit like the stereotypical incel guy. He thinks very highly of himself, even though that's not warranted, and he so badly wants to be a normal functional adult, but he isn't, and he kind of shifts the blame around. You could make the argument that having Osomatsu as the pack leader, some of the blame can be shouldered by him, but at the end of the day, it is just as much Choromatsu's fault that he is in this situation. Choromatsu is also a massive Idol fanboy, and I watched Love Live and I played Love Live, the mobile game, for a while, but outside of that, I have never been in Idol fandoms. And I know it's a little bit different in the US than it would be in Japan, so I'm not super familiar with the archetype of person that Choromatsu is basically a critique of or a parody of, but I can make some good guesses. There's a couple of points where he's like, yeah, I don't really care about the music, I'm just here for the cute girls and the vibes. And I could respect that, I guess. That's fair. But it's really it's to the point where it's like, buddy, what are you doing? Why are you here? That's the vibe Choromatsu gives off. And it's really funny because he's kind of a contrast to the rest of the characters because he tries so hard to be normal. He's the only sextuplet that doesn't accept his abnormalities and tries so hard to be a normal functioning adult, but at the end of the day, he drags himself down and gets dragged down by the rest of his brothers. And he tries to be this contrast. He speaks all of these words about how they need to do this and they need to do that, but he doesn't do it. He'll pester, sure, but he's not taking the steps himself either. He's just as bad as the rest of them, despite what he says about himself, despite what he believes. And I'll be honest, Chodomatsu is not my personal favorite, but he is still a very fun character in the sense that he contrasts the others very well, and some people can definitely resonate with him. It's when it comes to getting over your fear of taking on adult responsibilities and moving on with your life and moving out of that teenage mindset, like, it can be scary, and it definitely is a lot easier said than done for a lot of people. So I can understand why somebody would resonate with Chodomatsu, and I can definitely see why people like his character. The antisocial, depressed loner who prefers the company of cats. Ichimatsu is basically the weird furry guy, but it is endearing to the audience. Ichimatsu is definitely another fan favorite. He speaks to the socially awkward, and I don't know about the anime fandoms or the anime community in Japan, but I do know a lot of people in the anime community in the US definitely can relate and identify with that socially awkward, antisocial character. There's a few Ichimatsu-centric moments throughout the series that really showcase just how bad he is at connecting with others and being open and vulnerable. He's definitely one of those people that needs an emotional support animal, and he does get one. It's not his fault. That emotional support cat can also read his mind and let everyone know that he's lying and full of shit. Ichimatsu is a bit soft-spoken and lower energy than the rest of the characters, which provides this really fun contrast when most of the cast is very much like larger-than-life, big energy kind of vibes. Ichimatsu can definitely reach those heights when he's pushed into it, but naturally on his own, he's just kind of like chillin'. He's vibing. Which is so fun whenever Ichimatsu and Chodomatsu get to like have their duo moments, because they're both contrast to the Matsuno brothers as a whole. So seeing them together is really funny because their energy is very much like, I'm doing my thing and that's really weird, what the fuck are you doing kind of vibe. And Ichimatsu is also one of those characters that's very much just going with the flow and he's here for the ride. He doesn't initiate a lot of the hijinks that happens throughout the series, but he does definitely still play his part. And I think that's so fun. He's very endearing. Am I gonna just say every character is endearing? I think I am. Jushimatsu is the overenthusiastic, often considered autistic-coded character, with his special interest being baseball. Jushimatsu is the one that's just living life. Fun fact for my Black Butler friends out there, Jushimatsu is voice acted by the same man who voice acts Sebastian in the Japanese animes. Which I thought was very funny when I first found that out, because the two characters could not be more different. Jushimatsu is often perceived as very like over the top, very energetic, very happy, which I guess makes sense because he is the yellow one, and yellow is a very happy sunshine character. So yeah, no, that checks out that Jushimatsu would also be the happy sunshine guy. He's got a lot of fun moments, and he's kind of an enigma. No one really knows what he's thinking, and he's just so like over the top with everything that he does and very disconnected from the world in a way that like a child would be, that you're just kind of looking at him like, what is going through that head of yours? And I say disconnected from the world in the way a child would be, in the sense that, like, in the second episode, they pass a homeless person, and Jushimatsu's like, whoa, do you live in that box? Okay, bye! Like, very unaware, is how he comes off. Jushimatsu is definitely the character that I think most represents the clinging onto your childhood and not wanting to grow up aspect of Osomatsu-san, they all definitely struggle with not wanting to grow up, but Jushimatsu is the one that really holds on to that childlike wonder and whimsy more so than the rest of the boys. Lastly, we have Todomatsu. Todomatsu is the baby, and he really milks it. He is very much youngest sibling core. Yes, they're all the same age, but I guess birth order matters to twins. I myself am not a twin, so I can't really say just how important that is to twins or triplets or sextuplets. Todomatsu is very vain, and like Chodomatsu, believes he is the one most able to become a normal adult, except Todomatsu is more focused on hooking up with women than getting a job. He has had more employment than the rest of the boys. I'll just say that. He does have more work experience than anyone else. Todomatsu is very shallow. He's very into like social media and presenting his best self. He goes on dates. He really likes hooking up with people, going to parties, being social, and lying about himself and who he is to look better to the women that he is trying to get laid with. Debates on if he ever actually gets laid. The entire vibe of Osomatsu-san is they're all lonely, pathetic virgins. Not that that matters, but it matters to them. And they're all on that same level field. So Todomatsu's going through all this dating and meeting up and going to parties, and he's not successful. We don't really see a whole lot of this. It's kind of more of a thing that comes up in passing, except for a couple of bits where he takes one or more of his brothers to a date and it does not go well because the other brother ruins it. But honestly, they both ruin it because one brother is very much like, I'm gonna speak my mind and be kind of shitty. And Todomatsu is very angry and stressed out about it and ends up making things a million times worse in attempts to try to fix it. He's very focused on what others think about him more so than the rest of the boys, and he's very much, he is the one that would disown them if it made himself look better, and he basically has done that, kind of. Todomatsu is also one that I don't particularly like as much as the others, but he definitely has his place amongst the group and adds a lot to the series and the dynamics, and I think that's really fun. It wouldn't be Osomatsu-san without Todomatsu, or Chodomatsu, or any of the ones that are not your favorite. One thing each of these guys have in common, though, is that they are all deeply insecure and feel a level of shame for their life situation. They dwell on their shortcomings and try to blame other people or society for it instead of taking responsibility for their own decisions and actions. I am choosing to see this as them being incredibly immature and a bit lost instead of a negative critique on people who may be struggling to fit in and be useful to society. Because in the real world, people do not end up like this because they're lazy. You could honestly argue being lazy isn't even real. There's usually a root cause. Physical disability, mental health issues, or unusual or dire circumstances that keep people down. I know many able-bodied and mentally healthy people tend to dismiss how certain things like mental health issues or mental health disabilities or even physical disabilities and chronic illness can really keep a person from being able to just do things the way a normal person can. I'm not saying that the Matsuno brothers have any disabilities. I can't diagnose them with anything. They're fictional characters that are made to be funny and be ridiculous. And it's definitely, I think the message that the anime wants us to take away about them is that they're just incredibly terrible people. And so it's not really an issue of them being beaten down by society, but more so it's an issue of them feeling entitled and not making any strides to do anything for themselves. If you look at Osomatsu-san as a direct follow-up of Osomatsu-kun, which it basically is. It's more so a critique on their entitlement and the way that being spoiled growing up has warped them through the popularity of the original series and just the way they were kind of darling children in the media, and now they've grown up basically being this household name from such a young age, and that has kind of contributed to their entitlement and their inability to take responsibility and to basically grow up. That's pretty much the point of Osomatsu-san. But aside from the boys, we have an array of supporting characters that add just as much to the world. We have Chibita, who is an Odin stand owner who is passionate about the food he makes and also a childhood friend of the Matsuno boys. We have Iami, the con man, who honestly has pretty terrible luck. I don't know if all of his schemes blew up in his face as badly in Osomatsu-kun as they do in Osomatsu-san, but in Osomatsu-san, this man is struggling. Then you have Dayon, who's just Dayon. And then we have Dekapan, the quirky scientist guy who honestly, like, you can make arguments that he and Dayon are like a thing. And then we have characters like Nya-chan, who is the cat idol that Choromatsu is obsessed with, who eventually becomes a fully fleshed out side character by season 3. And then there's Hatabo, the weird kid who has a ton of money and connections and is just like doing whatever. There's literally an episode in season 1 where the boys are visiting Hatabo and Obama just like Skype calls him or something.
プレジデントからお電話です。
プレジデント
Hi, Mr. Flag. Obama!
It's very random on purpose, and it's a wild time. We also have the Matsuno parents. One would think that any parents of boys like these would be enablers of self-sabotaging behavior, and to some extent, yeah. We definitely see moments where their parents treat them more like children than the 20-something-year-olds that they are. But we also see their parents be a bit concerned with them, pushing these boys to make an effort in securing a future, although due to the nature of it being a gag anime, it's only brought up to cause comedic tension. But another thing I love is that this show makes a point to show us that the parents are equally as lame and mischievous as these boys. There are a few episodes that center around their parents, and they're such a good time. The apples do not fall far from the tree here.
I'm trying to watch home movies of what life was like before you were born.
I do want to say it's the mom that's like super mischievous most of the time, and she's such a vibe. She's so fun. And their dad is just kind of like in love with his wife and also kind of lame. But he's living life. What more could you ask for? I too would want to live life with a wife that I love. We also have their childhood friend Totoko, who is the girl next door type. All 6 of these boys have a huge crush on her, but that might just be because they grew up with her and she's the only girl that speaks with them. Totoko in her own right is very terrible and selfish and self-centered and also unemployed, I think. She's living the same life as the boys, but she's up on a pedestal because the boys idolize her, and for the most part we are seeing the world of Osomatsu-san through the Matsuno brothers' eyes. Totoko also wants to be an idol, but nothing ever works out for anyone in this show, so she too is just really unsuccessful and a loser like our main cast. There's even a couple of special episodes in between the first half of season 1 and the second half of season 1 where they go, like, it's Totoko's voice actor and I think Osomatsu's voice actor. They're like in character going through all of the like character moments throughout the first half of the first season and trying to determine who the worst person is, and then at the end it's like they're all equally as bad, including Totoko, and she's like, huh? But it's true. Totoko's a vibe though. It's honestly fascinating how this show takes the base concept of a person, like the unsuccessful, self-centered, unemployed, entitled person, and expands upon it in so many different ways. Yes, Osomatsu-san is a gag anime, but it's also a show that explores the fear of growing up and taking responsibility. It explores the fears and anxieties around working to the point of not having a life outside of your job and being exploited until you die. It explores the shame of being useless to society, even if that's by choice. It explores the feelings of being left behind by one's peers. It explores the mindless boredom, loneliness, and isolation that comes with this neat lifestyle. It explores the complicated feelings of this unstructured and oftentimes empty lifestyle. We see time and time again how these boys, out of laziness or poor self-esteem, continuously sabotage themselves and each other when one tries to break out of this cycle. The burning jealousy that they feel for those who are able to be functioning adults, for each other when one makes an effort. They're unapologetically terrible. And you know what? I do understand why some people really dislike this series, especially those of us who didn't grow up onto the original franchise. That and the humor is very rooted in Japanese culture. Worker exploitation and not having a life outside of your job is not unique to Japanese culture. It is definitely an issue in the US as well. However, that drive to be a useful component of society, from my understanding, is more of a bigger deal in Japan than it is in the US because, again, this is my understanding from someone who has not been to Japan, so it could be flawed. But it is my understanding that it is a more community-driven culture in the sense that people work for the better of the community, and it's not as individualistic as the US, where you are working to better yourself or get rich or whatever they're telling people they need to work for these days, other than like the obvious needing a wage to be able to afford to live. That's true everywhere you are. But Osomatsu-san is very much more rooted in Japanese culture than other animes. It's set in modern day Japan, and it's not made for a foreign audience. A lot of anime is more universal in the sense that it's got a fantasy setting, or it's set in some random European country or a place that is based off of Europe, and it feels less specifically Japanese than something like Osomatsu-san, and in that sense a lot of its humor or a lot of the aspects of the story are definitely something that is easier for a foreign audience to understand. Osomatsu-san is definitely, it can still be enjoyable by people who know nothing about Japanese culture, but it is definitely, like, I can understand why it didn't blow up in the US the way, like, Naruto did. I was absolutely enamored with Osomatsu-san when I first watched it, and I could get a sense of just how absurd and wild this show was, but what really made it hit home was the English dub. Subtitles tend to be more direct translations of what's being said, and that's great, that's fun. But dubs tend to localize things to make a show easier to understand for an audience. And the dub for Osomatsu-san does a really good job localizing the show in a way that upholds the integrity of the original, but also puts into perspective just how silly, vulgar, and out of pocket this show really gets. Different sensibilities in America versus Japan. One thing that's like fine to say in the US, or maybe not fine, but definitely like not as big of a deal, would be considered a bigger deal in Japan, and vice versa. However, the dub is not on any legal streaming services, and it's only available if you purchase the DVDs and Blu-rays, or if you purchase digital copies of the episodes. Which, I do want to say, the dubs were not released in the US until 2021, even though season 1 came out in 2015. Yes, you can pirate it, that's always an option, but by 2021, the ship had pretty much sailed for those who did not want to give the show a chance. However, in Japan, it seems that Osomatsu-san has made it was the most viewed anime of the fall season of 2015 when it aired, and it was the top-selling Blu-ray DVD in Japan in 2016 as far as anime releases go. We've also seen marketing tie-ins, including an entire special episode that was made in collaboration with the Japan Racing Association that featured shorts surrounding horse racing. It was kind of wild.
いや、馬だけど乗られている。
The Osomatsu franchise is not a stranger to promotional materials, though. One thing I found while researching for this video is that Osomatsu-san can technically be considered an alternate universe. In the 90s, Osomatsu-kun Grows Up was published as a beer ad campaign that basically showed the boys as adults and like the kinds of careers they would be in and stuff like that. So if you're the kind of person who considers ad campaigns as canon, then Osomatsu has a multiverse. Honestly, even within Osomatsu-san the anime, there's a bit of a multiverse already. We've got the main universe, but there's a world where the boys are all actually girls. There's a world where Osomatsu's a really bad detective, and a lot of the others are like part of the police force. There's a world where Jushimatsu turns into a dolphin. There's a world where each of the boys are actually just a figment of one's imagination. That one was kind of wild, especially considering that's a very popular trope for making a piece of media creepy or unsettling. It's the Osomatsu-san's equivalent of the Rugrats theory, but it was actually put into the show. There's a plethora of other versions of the characters as well, whatever makes for a good bit. Cavemen, high school delinquent, not to be confused with the versions of themselves from the movie where they go back in their memory to their high school days. And then you have the F6 version, which is their pretty standard anime boy version, and they do show up more than once. There are so many alternate universes for this anime, both in the anime itself and in the merchandising. It gives both the showrunners and the audience so much leeway with just how many situations can they throw these guys into. How many ways can you explore their characters and their dynamics and their relationships with one another? It's honestly really fun. I can really only speak for the English-speaking fandom, and even then my experiences are pretty limited to like American conventions and Tumblr, so keep that in mind. But Osomatsu-san is definitely one of those series that is much more popular in Japan, and hardly spoken about abroad, which makes sense considering its history, but even without that old context, it was still such a fun show. There were fans, but compared to series like My Hero Academia or even Black Butler, the community was much, much smaller. I remember in 2016, I went to my first anime convention, and there was an Osomatsu-san fan meet, and I believe there was like maybe 8 of us that showed up. Osomatsu merch and art have always been a bit rare at anime conventions, at least the ones I've been to. They were definitely there, especially in 2016, where pretty much everything I bought was Osomatsu-san related. But throughout the years, it's definitely dwindled down, which again makes sense because it was kind of popular when it first came out and has just been dwindling down ever since. I also find it kind of funny that there was a boom in popularity with season 1, but once that died out, it didn't come back with season 2, and there was even less fanfare for season 3. I actually didn't even know there was a season 3 until I came across an article about its release while doing research for an essay that I wrote in college. And to make this even wilder, I was definitely still following Osomatsu fan tags on Tumblr and other social media platforms, so I definitely should have seen something if people were talking about it. They just weren't. So, not to say that there were no English or American fans of season 3, because I definitely ran into some Osomatsu fans at the last anime convention I went to, which was May of 2023. I wore Ichimatsu, and there were some people that came up to me, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, did you know Ray Chase is here?" He voice acts Karamatsu in the dub. And I was like, "Oh shit, that's wild." He's also the voice actor of Bruno Butsurari in Part 5 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So that was like the main appeal to him being there. But it was still kind of cool though to have people be like, "Yeah, Karamatsu is here," instead of being, "Yeah, Bruno Butsurari is here." One thing I do love about the fandom, though, is its ability to yes and the most minor of characters, the most obscure concepts from a source material. And in the Osomatsu-san fandom, we were spending a lot of time thinking about this random-ass character that never actually shows up in the Osomatsu-san anime, aside from a cameo in the first movie. Togo is a character that only shows up in like one chapter of Osomatsu-kun manga. The Terrifying Lodger is the chapter that he's in. It's also consequently the only chapter I've read of the original manga. He's basically a shady conman that lives with the Matsuno family for a bit and manipulates little 10-year-old Osomatsu into committing crimes with him. There's a lot that you can imply in this whole situation that is incredibly upsetting and very, not great. And a lot of people have a lot of fun with that. One thing I've noticed with fandom in general is that the more happy and upbeat a source material is, the more angst-ridden the fandom will be, and vice versa. So while Osomatsu is generally a very happy and upbeat show, the fandom likes to make themselves upset and dwell on a lot of angst and put the guys in messed up situations for fun. There are a lot of messed up situations in the anime, but the tone is very different. The anime treats messed up scenarios in a very lighthearted, silly way, while the fandom really dives into what a character would be thinking and feeling and takes it a lot more seriously. This fandom did yes and pretty much every concept into the most angst-driven character studies I have ever read in my life, mixed with manipulation and trauma and the weight of being the eldest sibling, and you can see why fans of Osomatsu-san really liked exploring Togo and Osomatsu together in any shape or form. You're given a platter of guilt and angst that a lot of fans enjoy chewing on. Honestly, a lot of explorations of Osomatsu's character specifically tend to focus on his identity of being the oldest, feeling like he must be a leader of the pack, wrapping his whole identity around his brothers and not allowing himself to have problems of his own. It's honestly really interesting. They've got to give the little guy eldest daughter syndrome or something. I do think it's kind of definitely shows that most of the fandom is women or AFAB people. And you can see that with the marketing in Osomatsu-san as well. It is definitely geared more towards a female audience, and even the manga adaptations of the like current reboot are published in, I believe, if it's not shoujo, then it's josei manga magazines, which basically for women. For women or girls is the intended demographic here, which is kind of a fun swap up because Osomatsu-kun was initially targeted towards boys, or at least like everyone. I've said before and I'll say it again, I have a theory that if a piece of media is genuinely intended to appeal to all genders, it's going to be labeled as for boys, especially when it comes to manga demographics. Like any fandom, however, there were a lot of negative things and wild stories going on for the Osomatsu-san community, but I didn't have a lot of personal experience with it, so I don't feel inclined to dredge all that old drama back up. I think the biggest, most pervasive issue in the fandom is that most of the fans that got into shipping characters did ship the brothers with each other, and there was a lot of they called it BL Matsu, but it was literally just incest. And on the one hand, I definitely understand why that's gross and disgusting and very uncomfortable for a lot of people, and on the other hand, there are like no other characters. There are characters that aren't the brothers, but there are no like main characters other than the brothers. So I do understand why fans who wanted to engage in shipping tended to gravitate more towards shipping the brothers with each other. Not that that's like ideal, but also I don't care. I'm not here to tell you what to do. It doesn't bother me as much as other ships that make me this really uncomfortable. Like, it's not my thing, but I also don't see it being used to groom minors on the internet the way I have seen some other problematic ships be used. So I'm kind of not my circus, not my monkeys about it. even though the boys are definitely my monkeys, and that is definitely my circus because I love them very much. It was a lot easier to avoid discourse and negativity in the Osomatsu-san fandom than some others that I have been in. I was definitely active in fandom. I did a lot of cosplay, and I read a lot of fanfic, and I definitely consumed a lot of fan art. But I guess I just got really good at curating my own space. Just know that any community can and will grow toxic when enough people get involved, and the best thing you can do is curate your own space and enjoy smaller pockets of the fandom where it's just you hanging out and sharing your love for the series, ideally with like-minded people or people who are at least respectful of things that you may or may not like or dislike. You just gotta find your own little pocket, and that's the best way to enjoy any fandom on this planet. Since its release in 2015, there have been 3 seasons of anime, 3 anime movies produced, a live-action film, 2 stage plays, many games, both console and mobile games, manga adaptations, and a wild array of official merchandising. And most recently, a spin-off series of shorts that reimagine the boys as little dogs. It's clear that Osomatsu-san makes money, and the Japanese audience is still loving these silly, stupid guys, and I love that. Starting as a love letter to the original Osomatsu-kun, Osomatsu-san is a franchise and a reboot that has grown with the original audience having been children in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even 90s. So it's really interesting to see how they adapted that original series for an adult audience, and it's honestly really well done in my opinion. I think it's amazing. Take that with a grain of salt though, because I've not really seen much of the original. I didn't grow up with it, so I am not the target demographic or the people that they had in mind when making this reboot. That being said though, it's a really fun reboot to a really old anime, and that's Osomatsu-san. This was a little bit different from how I usually approach talking about media on this channel. I prefer to really sink my teeth into things and do character analysis, or with the Black Butler series, basically just recapping everything and spewing my thoughts on the internet. But sometimes doing a more laid-back overview of things can be pretty fun, especially when I am pushing an agenda trying to get more people to watch it. But if you guys enjoyed this kind of thing, please let me know. I'm wanting to talk more about other interests of mine other than Black Butler and Baldur's Gate. As much as I love those 2 series, I don't want to burn people out on them. So I'm trying to branch out a little bit more and talk about some of my more interests, my other interests. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know and I will make more. Either more about Osomatsu-san or more realistically, more overview type of things that I enjoy. I just love talking about my interests on the internet. It is my favorite thing to do. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys have not seen Osomatsu-san but you watched this entire video, thank you guys so much. Y'all are real ones. Especially because I know the vast majority of my audience is only here for Baldur's Gate 3, and a good chunk of y'all are only here for Black Butler. The Venn diagram of things that I like and people who are interested in those things, probably not very large. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you made it to the end, my next video is going to be about Halcyon, and I'm working on the Emerald Witch video. I'm hoping to get that done by the end of March. We'll see, but that is what I'm aiming for. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye!